How do we actually help people to improve at debating? So debating usually is a form of non-formal learning. Most of the time, debate is not taught by teachers or professionals, but by people who were taught it themselves by their peers and then give it on to the next generation. Now, this can be a very powerful thing. And research shows that people are more likely to accept the lessons that they're taught if they get it from someone who's gone through the process themselves, if they recognize that is someone much like them. But at the same time, it's important to recognize that there is a difference between being taught from someone who just is a peer who's gone through a process themselves and someone who is an educated professional. Think of the difference of being taught by a former professional footballer how to play football versus someone who has the pedigree in coaching. And if we look at football, we see a revolution where trainers who weren't necessarily top class footballers, but thought long and hard about the principles of how to play football. Trainers like Thomas Tuchel at Chelsea, how they are able to innovate the idea of how to teach football. And that's, I think, the sort of revolution that debate the world over might have to learn from as well. I want to, before I introduce our show's guest, very briefly elaborate why I think it is so important that we teach debating. And I can't do it more justice than a recent current affairs article called Teach Kids to Debate. Now, current affairs in large part argue that this is useful to find out what arguments are better, and they do so from a left-wing progressive perspective. But they also, I think, very neatly summarize in this article the immense benefits that debate can confer. The author says, and I quote, "From a practical standpoint, debate confers immense benefits. A recent 2021 study of thousands of debaters found that competitive debate is associated with better academic outcomes for students, including higher SAT math and SAT reading writing scores and higher GPAs, especially for gender minorities and students of colors, who are part of a urban debate league, which is a group of high school debate teams from urban high schools, generally located in large cities, that work predominantly with minority students. Previous research has found that debaters are more likely to graduate, less likely to drop out of college, more likely to pursue postgraduate education, have improved self-efficacy related to self-esteem, improved communication and public speaking skills, and better critical thinking skills. It's been found to be an effective way to teach civic education, the ability to advocate for both oneself and causes that matter, and skills necessary for success in any field, including time management, argumentative writing, self-managed study, library research skills, and logical thinking." Now, this just shows how crucial it is to use debate education. And indeed, there are people who are proponents of something called debate-centered education to provide so many of the important benefits that we need to operate in today's economy and in today's civic society. So given all those benefits, I think it is crucial to think about how we teach debate better. And that is why I was delighted to have our guest, Przemek Stolarski, on for this podcast. We spoke last year about the ability to organize tournaments in the COVID reality. But in this conversation, we go much deeper and we actually touch upon the expertise that Przemek is developing. Because he is a successful coach, a Harvard postgraduate researcher into education, and the co-founder of the Think and Speak Academy, which offers online debate courses for high school students based on the current best state of pedagogy teaching. He brings a wealth of practical coaching experience with a strong overview of the academic literature on improving how to teach debate. So let's take a look at this very important jumping off point on how you yourself can become better as a teacher and therefore help your students improve their life outcomes. Przemek, welcome back to the show. Great to have you.
Very much. Thanks for the invite.
So I'm speaking to you, you're in Boston right now, or Cambridge, I should say, because you're currently attending a postgraduate degree at Harvard. Could you tell me briefly why you've opted to go to Harvard? I mean, that's a very selective degree that you've been able to attend. And also, of course, it's not something that you do regularly, going to the United States for a postgraduate course. So why did you take the sacrifice and all efforts to be able to get on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean?
Well, in my case specifically, I would say that it was even a more difficult decision than for lots of other people, because I never even, like thought about studying in the US. I'm not a great fan of this country, and I have never been particularly interested in, studying opportunities here in America. So when I was applying for my undergrad, this was, like off the table. But the real reason why I'm here is that it just turns out that American universities such as Harvard or Stanford and Columbia specifically, I would say these three, are really good when it comes to their education programs. So what I was interested in when I was looking for my master's was something that would have a lot of focus on learning design. Learning design is this, I would say, a relatively novel field of learning sciences when we figure out what are the most effective ways to teach people and create a number of different experiences that are engaging. So it can be anything ranging from a classic school lesson through an online course to, like maybe a museum experience, or maybe, like media, some informal education through media. So I was very much interested in that. And the reason as to why I was interested in that was twofold. One reason was that I think I have learned myself a lot through debating in the last few years. And this being a rather peculiar kind of experience that we're not particularly used to in schools, like sort of seem to fit into this field quite a lot, as in there is a lot of reasons as to why you might want to know how to effectively teach debating. There isn't that much research about it. So this was my primary motivation. My secondary motivation was that just in general, I think that schools all around the world, and 100% in my experience, are not really doing a great job when it comes to learning. And when it comes to teaching, I would say that lots of the positive learning experiences happen outside of schools. So I'm just curious, what makes these experiences happening outside of schools effective, engaging? What are the learning design principles and methods being used in them? And I guess, like with that thought in mind, that was very puzzling me for many years. I decided probably the best place to explore that is Harvard.
That's really, it's very interesting. And I think indeed, I work for an organization that primarily cares about informal learning as a supplement to formal learning, because indeed what we're recognizing is that there's all these kind of educational approaches that are being talked about, but the formal learning system very often lags behind, and we do need to plug into the gap. So I'm very interested to talk about that further. But before we go into the depth and geek out about the pedagogical philosophies, besides studying at Harvard, you yourself are aiming for a bit of informal learning through the TASA Academy. Could you briefly explain to me what that is?
Sure. So Think and Speak Academy is a provider of online debate classes, courses, and anything that is in the space of argumentation, critical thinking, public speaking to young people all around the world. So we are a global company currently operating in a number of countries. We want to expand. And the primary reason as to why we do that is that we think that in the world of competitive debating, and there is a number of skills that are very much transferable to other areas. So regardless if people want to become world champions one day, or whether they just want to use them in their private lives, there is an immense value in learning debating. And we want to do this online, leveraging the possibilities of this mode of learning, so that we break the barriers of geography, access, and cost that I suppose each and every debater with a significant experience have met, have encountered in one way, shape, or form.
All right, that's indeed very important. And as you're pointing out, indeed, one of the things that the digital divide has been able to do is increase access. At the same time, there are people who think that debating is something that is mostly done for people who are themselves of a high academic aptitude level. So that this is something that if you pursue into debating, you do it, for instance, because you think it is something that fits in a very particular skill set that allows you to apply to the kind of colleges that you're currently in the halls of at Harvard. But you're saying debating should indeed be for everyone. So how does the work that you do at the academy feature into making sure that this is accessible to all?
This is a very huge problem and something that is incredibly close to my heart. I come myself from a middle-sized city in Poland. I didn't have a debate society or club in my school. I heard about debating entirely randomly. So it was a long journey for me, and I can definitely relate to all of these people that feel like that debating is, just in general, a very exclusive activity. I think that there is a lot of problem with the selection bias that we have in the debate community, where lots of people that come into our like trainings, lots of people that come into tournaments are people that already have a high aptitude, both when it comes to traditional sort of academic abilities, as well as in general, like the skills that we develop in debating. So it's particularly easy to work with them because they're already good at it. So that's definitely a problem. I think that there are primarily two ways in which we want to do this in Think and Speak Academy. So the first one is that we really believe that debating, understood as going to tournaments and doing practice rounds, is a teacher, but a very unfair teacher. So a good analogy to think about this is, let's imagine you want to become a professional football player or a soccer player, as my American friends would say. And there are two ways of doing that, right? So one of them is that every day you're going to, like go out with your friends and play a game or two, like in a field that you have nearby your home. And surely there are going to be some people that through this way are going to become professional football players. One day there is going to be a scout that is going to come to this, like neighborhood field. He or she or they are going to notice, oh my goodness, this player is amazing, we need to invest in him. But there are going to be way more people that are never going to get that chance, because obviously just playing a given game, a given sport is a very unfair teacher. It comes down to a number of different factors. Some might be, like inborn talent, some might be environmental factors, some might be related to motivation. So just in general, the predominant mode of learning debating that we have currently, which is that most people don't really have professional coaches, most people don't really have professional training, is just a very unfair teacher of the game that in and of itself brings a lot of useful skills. So we want to change that. And we basically believe that lots of these people that can access debate classes in one shape or form are not getting most of it. And we want to change that by creating programs that are evidence-based, that are supported by educational research, sort of leverage these kind of resources. But that is obviously only a part of this answer, right? Because there's another element, which is, okay, but how do we make sure that it is these people that actually need these skills to the greatest extent that come to our classes? Obviously, we cannot do that as of now. We are still not a gigantic company with, like 100 million investment into our budget every month. So as much as we would love to go to all of these, like underprivileged places and help out kids that are surely mostly in need of these skills, we cannot do that on our own. We are trying though to find ways how to do this in a sustainable way. So I think that one of the ways to do that is to focus on peer-to-peer learning component, meaning that a fantastic, like driver of increasing access to debating is just teaching students to teach others. And this is something that is very, very close to our heart. This is also how my own journey started. So I was taught the basics of debating by some experienced debaters in Poland. And because of the lack of resources and the lack of coaches, I started teaching and coaching my peers. And I think that this was a fantastic thing, both for me as well as for the overall community. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to do that. And obviously we're trying to cooperate with a number of organizations, charities, NGOs, to reach out with debating to places where that is not really accessible as of now. So just a couple of examples of these sort of activities would include, there is a new organization in Poland, Teach for Poland. It's a member of Teach for All network that is, like pretty much present in most countries of the world as of now. So we have led series of workshops for teachers to implement competitive debating, as well as debate-related resources and debate-related methods in their own practice. We are cooperating with, like different organizations outside of Europe as well that have nothing to do with debating, but do other educational projects so that they can basically introduce their own beneficiaries to the activity in and of itself. And most importantly, the long-term goal of the whole company is to be classified as a social entrepreneurship. So our ideal model is that we are going to be able to leverage the skill set that we hope to acquire even to a greater extent over the next coming years, and basically all of the networks and access, so that we can have two branches, one of which would be working with people that can pay for debate services, and the other one would be just sort of redistributing that in a good socialist manner to people that are like most in need of that. So I suppose that while this is a long-term goal, this is something that would make this whole journey complete. And without realizing that, I don't think that I will be able to say with confidence that I'm satisfied with the whole venture.
So the last part really like tickles into my sympathies. But I was curious by the first thing that you're mentioning when you both mentioned, for instance, that professionalization is highly important. On the other hand, you're building into peer learning systems. And that's very often seen to be the opposite, right? So when we think of highly advanced professional education system, we're thinking of teachers who've gone through years of training. We'll be thinking of the fact that if you go to football as the analogy here, you'll have highly certified coaches who've been coaching for years, who coach top players. And it isn't that the kids of 17 are teaching the kids that are 15 in football. So how does both professionalization and peer education feed on another?
That is a fantastic question. I think something that we should ask ourselves to like way more often, because I think that there is no obvious answer, that's for sure. And there is a challenge here. But one of the reasons as to why I love this sport analogy, saying that debating is a sport of some sort, is that this analogy is like very malleable to answering these kind of questions. And there is so much we can learn from that. So I think that when it comes to debating, there are two kinds of debating. There is competitive debating. There's people that are, like people that have ambitions to become champions. And peer-to-peer learning is not going to do much in this regard. You can obviously learn from people that are slightly more experienced. So say if you are on your journey to becoming like a top debater in your country, say you're a member of your national team, you can surely learn something from people that are slightly older than you and say have been a part of the team, had been a part of the team a year before you, but it's obviously not going to be particularly effective. So there is a need of coaches in this area to a very, very great extent. However, there is also a recreational part of debating, the same as with sport, right? Most of the people around the world play sport only recreationally. Like there is only a very tiny portion of people that want to do this as a career of some sort. And I think that it is in this area where peer-to-peer learning might be a fantastic tool to leverage all of these, like resources in the form of students that we have. And I think that one really important thing to mention here is that while obviously peer-to-peer learning in many situations is not going to be the optimal mode of learning, it is a necessary one in so many situations. Because one of the reasons as to why people get engaged in debating and people effectively learn debating is the community component, the thing that makes it relatable, the thing that makes it like homely to some people. So I suppose that even at this highest level, the peer-to-peer learning component is something that is very, very much needed. And while I understand that sometimes, like there might be different sort of approaches to organizing a large scale debate project. Do we invest in professional coaches so that they go to 50 places and create fantastic debaters in these 50 places? Or do we invest in student coaches and they go to 500 places, and in these 500 places, we might not have any world champion, but we might have lots of people interested in debating? I think that this is a very valid question to which I don't have an immediate answer. I think that there is room for both, but I think that in some cases, in quite a few cases, both of these approaches are going to be perfectly suitable for like for working together, to work together. So that would be my short answer to that question.
All right. And what I'm then maybe interested in is, so obviously, apart from the United States, where we see often well-funded debate programs, where there are often teachers who are running the debate training, very often the model already is that it is, in a sense, peer coaching, because debate clubs are usually just organically started by maybe hopefully a teacher, but
Right.
most of the time a group of high school students, where then the exam year high school students teach the kids below them. So we could say to some extent there already is peer learning. What's the advantage that your company brings? So what is it that they're going to add to the current peer learning that is in place to make it a more effective thing than just playing pickup games and hope someone gets something out of it at one point?
Sure. Certainly, that is like happening to a large extent already in the current world. There are good examples of that. There are clearly debate societies and debate clubs that are run very successfully by students, and I think that massive kudos to them. Congratulations on their effort, their grit, their resilience, because what they're doing is incredibly important, both for themselves as well as for the community that they serve. But there are also many examples when these projects fail, when somebody starts a debate society and 2 months after that, like it's dead. And there are many reasons for that, obviously. So it's by no means a simple thing. But I think that one of the major ones is that if you want to start a debate society and you sort of use resources available online, so you watch workshops or maybe you attend one workshop and then you try doing this on your own in your school, the likelihood of that failing is very, very difficult, because even though you might say copy a workshop that you see online, that is not going to, that is not going to make you a debate coach. The third class, somebody is not going to understand what you are saying and you are not going to know why. And so it's not really effective. It's not really sustainable in the long term. And as such, I don't think that the sort of current model is something that we should cherish a parts of that. We should cherish some parts of that. But in general, this is something that we should strive to change. The way we look into it is that specifically when we're working with schools, because we both run our individual classes, our group classes, as well as different partnerships with schools and institutions. Specifically when we're working in schools, we are really, really interested in creating a very vibrant school community where this peer-to-peer coaching doesn't happen without any guidance whatsoever, right? So I can give you an example of one of the implementations that we have. I've been working as a debate coach in St. Paul's Girls' School in the UK. We are currently cooperating to a very great extent and sort of trying to basically have this school as a guinea pig for lots of our ideas, just because this is such a fantastic school with lots of support for debate programs. And for the last 2 years, there is 2 hours of coaching every week by me with additional hours some weeks. And there is 6 hours of debates and coaching by my senior debaters to these debaters that are literally just entering the first year of school. So we have kids as young as 12-year-olds starting debating, doing debate during lunchtime, where it's no effort. You just come to lunch break, you just do a debate, listen to a 15-minute session, and they, basically are hooked into the activity. Obviously, all of that happens with some guidance, although I must admit, I don't have to guide my students that much, because they're just very, very good debaters. And I think that they also have a really good understanding of how to coach their friends and their peers. But in general, I think that this model is exactly what we should have. So I can obviously think of, different ways of implementing that. But ideally, what I would like to see is people attending our classes, spending some time with us, becoming really proficient debaters, maybe in their junior year of high school. And then in their senior year of high school, spending, a couple of months running their own debate community in a school for their, younger peers. And I think that this approach is something that would both work in terms of the scalability of that. So it would be easy to scale, as well as the effectiveness of that. That is obviously a dream of some sort, but I think that we need to dream. And I think that a good, sort of thought experiment when it comes to debating is to imagine how would we go about implementing all of these debate programs if none of these programs existed before. Because I think that quite a few things that we're doing currently are things that we're doing out of habit that are not necessarily the things that are, from the educational standpoint, most effective ones.
Yeah, could you give me a couple of examples of the habits that we might need to unlearn in debating coaching?
Sure, I think there's plenty of them. So bear in mind that this is obviously, sort of more leaning towards my thoughts when it comes to British parliamentary debating, because this is the kind of debating I have done to a greatest extent. So in some other contexts, it might not be applicable. It might not be most applicable. But I can think from the top of my head of 3 things. First one, style. I think that style is a component that should not be assessed. That is my sort of stance on that. I think that the reason for this is that it's just very difficult not to be subjective about that. But this does not mean we should, diminish the value of style. The value of style is incredibly, incredibly huge. Once you go out of your traditional BP competition, when you speak, at a pace that is very difficult to understand, you need to be clear in articulating your thoughts. And suddenly debating coaches, debating communities are failing kids at providing that. So I think that, being clear that style might not be this one rubric where we give points for, but it is, where a lot of educational value of debating lies is definitely something that we ought to change. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is that there is, I would say, a really huge emphasis on learning content in debating, meaning reading a lot of stuff, listening to a lot of stuff, and sort of trying to outsmart another person. And I think that it is one of the least educational things that one can do, specifically when one is coaching high school debaters. So the chances are that a 17-year-old is going to know less than a 23-year-old from college. And like, no matter how smart 17-year-old is, statistically, this is going to be true. This means that the advantage that a 17-year-old can have over a slightly older university debater can never be in content, because it's just very difficult, like to get all of this sort of information. It doesn't mean, it is not to say that a 17-year-old cannot win with university debaters. We have seen that happening quite a lot of times. So obviously the emphasis should not be on content, but on technique, on method. And I think that one of the things that we are doing to a very little extent currently in debating is creating these frameworks of thinking, creating these structures that one should follow. Meaning, when you go to a prep time, you should not brainstorm, whatever that means. You should have 7 steps that you should follow one by one, and whatever is the motion, you should stick to that, because statistically, this guarantees that you are going to get the best result, because this minimizes what is, like the effect of nerves, the effect of, like being under stress, knowing something or not knowing something, and ensures that you actually do what you can learn very easily, or maybe very easily is too much of an overstatement, but it is possible to learn that. So for instance, when we are coaching our kids, we always say 7-minute prep time, 7-step prep time. Here is the structure. You learn that by heart, and then you just do that as many times as possible. So by the time you hit a motion that you have never heard about, you are not going to freak out. Oh my goodness, no ideas are coming to my mind. You are going to be very methodical about that. And that can be applied to literally any other kind of, like debate element. And then the third one would be, I think debating requires a lot of deliberate practice, and this practice needs to be sensible. So nobody is going to learn by doing a round of debating every week for 2 years without actually, like tracking what their progress is, without tracking what their feedback is. So I think that a good example of this is Michael DG, European champion from 2016, has this famous saying that he was for a long time doing a prime minister speech every morning. And then he was listening to that speech and sort of trying to learn from that. With all due respect to Michael DG, I think that at the stage when he was doing that, he was already a very experienced debater. So even if he was not sharing that recording with somebody, it was relatively possible for him to track what are the like sort of pitfalls in his speeches. And I think that this is a great exercise. Don't get me wrong. I think that this exercise is something that can be so much more effective if we actually have debate curricula, if we actually have coaches that are doing that tracking for students, if we have actually people that are, like sort of other people than debaters themselves and can, like provide more advice on that. The overall feedback model that we have currently in our debate competitions is well suited for understanding why you lost or why you won, but it's not really well suited for educational purposes, right? Like you don't learn much, to be honest, from these feedbacks that you get at a debate competition because you are stressed, you are looking forward to another round, and there's just so much information. So without having some guidance, without like basically organizing your own learning, it's very difficult. And I think that lots of that can be done, like even without coaches, even when you just give them resources, provide them initial guidance, and then they can, like sort of go off. So it's not necessarily the case for we need professional coaches everywhere. It's more the case, even when we are running debate societies in our high school and universities, we should put some thought into, like what are the habits that we have currently, and maybe change them. Maybe saying, oh, you are going to learn from feedback and just listen to feedback and make note of that. It's not necessarily the most useful advice that one can give.
Yeah, so I
guess these would be 3 habits that I would love to see changed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very valuable advice in this. Just to give my own little spin on this. So I think the first thing that I think is incredibly important, what you're pointing out, is that this also means that the mindset of when you are coaching and debating needs to change from you delivering like content or what you think to know or lessons you have towards more guiding students to that kind of approach. And also, if I look back at my own learning and how I learned to debate, I think first of all, I got help by getting a model, probably not too dissimilar to the 7-step model, although I think we had 4 or 5 steps only. So there's definitely some more advancement there that could help me come up with like first set of arguments. But I think secondly, that once we did that, we felt at a certain moment that even using those models, we might feel that sometimes it gets a little bit still after a time, or you come up with a set of arguments, but you don't like advance things beyond a point of genericness. So I think what was really helpful there was that we indeed, as you pointed out, did deliberate practice. And I think within deliberate practice, what we said, for instance, was if we go to this competition, these are the 2 or 3 points we want to improve on. Or indeed, if we did the prime minister training that you suggested, that we didn't just do a prime minister, but we actually thought, okay, with this prime minister, I'm going to focus on this component of the speech because I want to practice in that. So I think those are all very, very useful skills. But on the other hand, it does sound like this is very much geared towards a sort of a competitive mindset. And therefore, that might not be something that is in it for all. Do you feel that this is the kind of thing that everyone who wants to learn to debate should attempt? Or is this really only for those who want to get competitive success, and the rest of it should just be satisfied enough with doing pickup games and just leave them be and enjoy whatever level they get without this type of deliberate practice?
I love this question. I think that it touches the kind of discussion that we never had in the competitive world of debating. And I think that we ought to have that discussion quite a lot, because throughout the past decade at the very least, but definitely for a longer time, competitive debating and debate education sort of, like interacted on different fields. You, Dan, definitely know that as like a person very much very closely associated with IDEA. There have been competitive parts of that. There have been education parts of that. So let me answer your question with an example. And that is also going to maybe give some of our listeners another great piece of advice. So a couple of years ago, Sharmila Parmanand shared with a panel of debaters, I can't remember where was that, one thing that she used to do when she was a competitive debater herself. She said that sometimes she would take her notes from a debate competition and try to rewrite them, try to rewrite the arguments that she actually delivered in a competition so that they are, like basically the best version possible of an argument. And at the time when I heard that advice, I was like, well, sounds like a fun exercise. I'm not sure what's the exact value of that. And I must admit that I have tried doing this a couple of times myself. I wasn't particularly convinced it works for me, but there is actually a very good piece of educational research that supports this kind of thinking. So when it comes to learning math, for instance, it's been proven scientifically by a number of different studies that kids learn so much more when they have work examples, when, for instance, there is an equation that is already started, and for instance, the outcome is not correct, and they need to correct that, rather than learning from only having a prompt. How is that answering your question, you might wonder? So basically, I think that when you think about math, you can think, okay, so maybe this is just a thing for, like the best math geniuses that really want to get superb at like solving mathematical equations. And you would be wrong, because obviously it's a useful thing, like for everybody. So why I think that the frequency of this kind of exercises, how serious you are about that, this is obviously something that, like is influenced by this factor of how competitive you want to be. The overall practice of these kind of exercises literally changes your thinking. So even if you don't want to win any competitions, even if you don't want to participate in any competitions, you clearly are going to benefit quite a lot from understanding, okay, so that structure of the argument I ran doesn't make much sense, because the explanation I provided is only the explanation as to why my claim is true, but actually not an explanation as to why my claim is important. How about I rewrite that? I rewrite that and I see, okay, now I have a very clear structure where I can very clearly see what kind of warrants support my claim as being true and what kind of warrants support my claim as being important. And that is the kind of thinking that is so transferable to many, many different, like areas. You're going to write a college application essay, or you're going to write an essay at a university, and you will be like, something is missing from the argument that I'm trying to make here. Or I reference that work, and there is some explanation of why that work is relevant, but not in the 2 dimensions that I really want to have. So while I think that clearly we should not, like sort of, how would you say, throw a number of very complicated exercises and drills at kids that are just starting debating, and there is a lot of value in doing simple things in fun environments. I think that there is a lot of value in doing this stuff that works both at a competitive level as well as at this, like sort of recreational level, because there is an educational value to that. And I think that this also touches upon another element, which is, I don't think that this distinction between competitive debating and recreational debating is something that is so much related to the methods that we use. It is so much more about the mindset. And I think that the role of coaches is also to sort of, work on that mindset, right? I think that even when, once again, coming to the sort of football sports analogy, if you are working with, like a group of 12-year-olds, and even if it is a professional football club, you cannot tell them that all of them are going to be professional football players, because that would be, like over-promising. That would be not ethical, and that would definitely not yield good educational results. So
And
you
probably
need to
also not
manage
true, right?
Yeah, like objectively, it is not true. Like there is a great chance that 0 people out of this group that you coach are going to be professional football players. So I think that when we have debate coaches, that the same kind of thing should be true, right? We should, specifically in schools, right? When it's in school setting, then it's definitely even to a greater extent. Everybody should be welcome. Everybody should be able to try this activity and take, like the benefits of that. But there should be an expectation that, like basically, if you want to be really good at that, you need to put effort, you need to put a lot of deliberate practice. And I, as a coach, I'm going to do my best to help you. But even though I might help you to the greatest extent possible, it doesn't guarantee you are going to win this or that competition. So maybe one of the reasons why you should be in this class is because you enjoy debating, is because you find it a fun activity, or because you find, like how it might be helpful in your life, rather than just because you want to win a competition and write it in your resume or your college application.
So for me, what it sounds like is a couple of things. Is that the first of all is that you're actually specifying something that I think we do unknowingly when we start debate teaching, but then we don't advance. So we think, for instance, in the way that we like give argument models like sexy or sale, that's already a form of scaffolding. But then, as you're pointing out, is we just stop there. We give that one form of scaffold, and then we don't advance it further, or we don't teach people to do it themselves. I think that's very useful. And the other feeling that I get is that we're basically saying is, there isn't necessarily a trade-off between having sort of a competitive mindset and thinking of debating as a fun activity. In fact, debating or any activity gets more fun the more you improve at it, because if you get competent at something, you can enjoy it far more. Just thinking about if you would become an artist, there's a very much of a struggle at the beginning, because it's often quite complex, for instance, to bring something that is in your mind on the piece of paper in front of you. And only when you deliberately practice drawing certain facial shapes, you start really enjoying it. So it's not dissimilar as football. And even with football, I would argue it gets a lot more fun if you're actually able to consistently pass to your teammates. So that's, I think, an incredibly interesting thing to say, that there is not necessarily that trade-off. But on the other hand, what we're seeing when competitiveness takes over is that it might often increase a certain strain, because people do want to compete and get better. And we're, of course, now recording this in 2021, where we're seeing on the competitive sports level, we're seeing large amount of discussion about people receiving, say, a mental burnout because competitive is taken over. We're looking at examples of Naomi Osaka or Simone Biles, who weren't able to perform at the height of their level because of the pressure that they self-imposed, because they tried to be competitive. So how do you straddle that line between striving to get better and hoping that fun ensues over that, and the feeling of, because I need to get better, I need to perform? And if that competitive mindset doesn't translate to better results, I get burned out because my expectations are pushing me down.
I'm very sad to notice the same trend that you notice, both in the outer world, sort of, as well as in the world of competitive debating. So that is definitely a massive challenge. I don't have an immediate answer to that. I must admit, I don't really know what is the best way to deal with that. I think that there are two things that come to my mind, though, that I think would find some support in educational research on that. So by the way, to anybody listening or watching us, I think that people should follow through with this sports analogy and actually read something about sports coaching, because I think that there is so much to learn from that. So one of the books that I can recommend is a book by Doug Lemov, The Coach's Guide to Teaching, which basically has this really important premise: coaching is teaching. And there is so much coaches can learn, sport coaches, like proper sport coaches, can learn from teachers, and so much teachers can learn from coaches. And we don't leverage that to enough of an extent. So one of the things that is mentioned in this book and very much supported by educational research is basically that managing expectations is one of the most important things that coaches can do. And it is not this one pep talk that you have, like once a year or once half a year, but it is present in each and every piece of what you do. So the way we give feedback, I think that the sort of responsibility that lies on us as coaches, as judges, is just immense. And I think that if we, develop a better set of practices on how to give feedback, a better set of practices on how to, actually deal with that really, I would say, vulnerable moment for lots of people when they're receiving feedback, that would be very, very much useful. No easy answer how to do that, obviously, because it means that, you wouldn't have to have coaches that are more prepared for that. You would have to have competitions that are attended only by judges that are really good at the educational side of that. And obviously we know that this is not the case. So no easy answer in regards to that, but I think that this is the general direction that we should take. But second of all, and I think that this is something that we can actually do not at all at the educational level, but entirely on the competitive level, meaning how the competitive community is organized. I think that we should recognize that motivation of every human being, this intrinsic motivation or both actually intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of every human being in this kind of setting, comes down to mastery, purpose, agency, and community. And I think that the more we emphasize each and every part of these components equally, the better results we're going to have. I feel like we have too much of a sway into the mastery side of that, and too less emphasis on purpose and agency and community. And I think that maybe, having debate practices that would happen, that would happen in this, more community related vibe, where people come to a practice, not only because they really want to get, this sort of university level practice, not only because they really want to prep for WDC or for UDC, and they really want to, become the best debaters of the world, but also because they want to share with the community, they want to learn, and they basically engage in this experience because it's fun. I think this would be, maybe a direction that we should take. And I suppose that now we are sort of circling back to this trade-off of competitive debating and social aspect of that and educational aspect of that, because it's obviously, in clash in these sort of situations. But I think that there is a number of small practices that we can develop to alleviate that clash and sort of achieve best of the both worlds. So it comes down to very simple things, such as, well, probably when you have a novice debater that you have never seen before and they're really bad at debating, you shouldn't look down on them. You should talk to them. You should, share why the activity is such a great thing. I remember how overwhelming and intimidating it was for me to go for my first university competitions, not knowing anybody, losing to everybody because I was obviously a very bad debater at the time. And nobody that I, didn't come from my country, nobody talked to me. So I feel like it should be changed. And I think that if we look into the examples of how it is organized in different sports, surely it's not ideal, but we would find good examples of that. Another idea that comes to my mind is that I think that the competitive world of debating in and of itself should be sort of organized in different tiers. So I think that back before the pandemic, it sort of organically happened. So if you go to Oxford AV and Cambridge AV, you can expect the debates to be, done really tough. And if you go to BBU Open, greetings from Poland, from US to Romania, a very fantastic competition. That is probably going to be a less competitive competition with, this social aspect enhanced. Online debating makes it very hard. And I think that it would be really good to develop, this kind of, maybe labeling. Hi, this is, a competitive tournament, or this is a tournament for fun, or this is a tournament geared towards, people that have not debated regularly. And there is a little bit of that done. We have novice competitions, we have prom competitions, but I think that there should be more of that. So these are my thoughts on that matter, but quite frankly, I don't have much to add, and I don't think that I have an answer to that. I would love to have. I'm actually very interested. What is your take on that? But in general, I think that these kind of discussions are so much more important than the discussions on whether opening composition is overpowered in BP, or whether we should change the speaker scale. With all due respect, and once again, saying hi to my dear friends that are very much engaged in these discussions.
But I think it's indeed very fair that this is indeed, in the end, going to more meaningfully influence things. Other than the fact, of course, that the other discussions that you highlight are discussions where we talk about that, but no one is ever even engaging in ideas of how to change certain structures in the formats of debating. We all seem to be relatively stuck within the format, but rather the environment surrounding the format indeed receives very little mention. I think one of the things that you think you're highlighting is there seems to be a world where we think that novice competitions exist. So sort of in the first year of debating, you should be learning. And then we hope that some people get good enough so that they can occasionally become competitive. And by that, we often think that this means people who reach break rounds. But there's a large mass in the middle where you're sort of stuck and left to your own devices. So like you're relatively left to your device if you're a novice, because if a community doesn't pick you under their wings and sends you to a novice competition or gives you the attention there, you fall on the wayside. But then even if you survive that first year, you're then sort of in the big nothing, unless you have gotten the fortune of being highly talented or well coached. So I do think that that is an incredibly important thing that you're adding here. And perhaps it is indeed, as we're pointing out, the mindset that is important, that we are able to build on those mindsets in order to make sure that people themselves can come to a competition and knowing what more they want to expect and want to get out of it. And then maybe a community that appreciates this idea of the mindset much more and helps you to go more deliberate into that instant. I think that's an incredibly valuable approach and something that we probably do a lot more on. So maybe then ask like near future, because you're like doing this both by studying as well as thinking about the way that the company develops. What does the next year look like for you? How are you going to make that dream coming a step closer to reality?
So I think that spending last few years to a very great extent on both doing competitive debating myself, coaching, but just in general, sort of being in this very insular community, I had not realized how many interesting things are out there related to education, related to something that pumps me up. So definitely this year I will be spending to a great extent on exploring all of these different options. And I think that one really good lesson is probably that we should sometimes focus more on a problem that we want to solve in education rather than the solution. And I think that debates are always only one of the solutions rather than the problem that we want to solve. So in this overall area of, like teaching very specific ways of rigorous critical thinking and articulating them, which I think debating ultimately is all about. I think that there are other solutions, and I want to explain them. I want to work with all kinds of people that are in this really broad area. So for the next couple of months, I will, basically look here and there and look for different initiatives, different pieces of research, different professors that work in the field. But other than that, I really think that there is, my other motivation to study here at Harvard, which is that my own educational experience was really, really bad. I didn't like my school at all. I would say it was traumatic. I don't think that this is an inappropriate word. And I think that what I have seen was traumatic, meaning the experiences of my peers. So I think that given that we, being young people, being school students, spend so much time in school in very formative years, our priority above anything else should be to change them. So while I do appreciate the immense value of informal education, and I think that more good learning happens in informal education than informal education, that should not stop us from, sort of seeing schools as this doomed problem that can never be solved. And I think that we should, engage in all ways possible to change schools. And so I think that one really, sort of good illustration to think about this is that you would often hear this kind of mantra that young people are disengaged, that young people don't vote, that young people are not engaged in democracy and all of that. But that is entirely not true. There are so many people that are engaging in their own communities, organizing different social impact projects. And there's, at the very least in the communities I know, in the backgrounds I'm coming from, it's a growing trend. So when I was in high school, MEUN was like the highest possible level of initiative that one can organize. Right now, like you have literally students organizing their own mentorship schemes, their, like own college application programs, all of that. So there is a lot of that. But I wonder, why is that all of these initiatives are never curated by schools, guided by schools, receive any help from schools? Most of the time, they actually are done in spite of schools. Most of the time are actually, schools are an obstacle to all of these initiatives. So that is a huge problem that I'm personally fascinated by and like frustrated by as well, because I have felt that to a really great extent. And I would like to do something in this area. I don't know yet what that thing is. Maybe that is going to, I mean, surely it's going to be present in my debate work, in companies' work to some extent, but I am also very much open to other initiatives. And I think that being here at Harvard with this, like really great community of people with education background is just fantastic, because I find so many people here coming to study education precisely because of the same reason as myself, because they didn't like school and they want to change that.
What
So
strikes
it
me
would be
really
really
much about
fantastic.
So what strikes me really much about this conversation is that all the things that we're pointing out here about like the way in which you can self-develop in order to maybe get better at a certain thing, potentially to break in a competition or do well, or the way in which students self-organize and form peering schemes or build their own social impact companies. None of these things are things that are measured according to the yardsticks that societies do put in front of us. It's very often examination that's very built around rote learning. So it's dull. It doesn't really ask you to think about what you want to get out of it, but rather just about passing an exam. If we're thinking about community engagement, it's often about voting, which happens maybe once every 4 years and is done through an incredibly imperfect and indirect end, because you vote, then maybe one party comes into government, they talk coalitions, and then in the case of my country, maybe 6 months later you get not even a government. So it's I think very powerful to hear here that what you're doing here is forming a learning style that's also built around the opportunity of self-development, because now finally you're able to set your own goals, and that is far more satisfying, I think, far more willing to learn. So this sounds like a very good approach to push. But indeed, as you're pointing out, that's something that exists currently outside of the formal structure. So I'm very much hoping that you're able to come up with ways or express ways in which we can also potentially get the formal structures to learn from this type of spontaneous self-development.
Certainly. And I think that one of the things that is also important to recognize is that I'm saying very loud out here to anybody listening to us, if you have an idea, if you have a project, just reach out. I think that we should talk, we should discuss, we should do things together. And like 9 out of 10 times, I will definitely respond and try to contribute in one way or another. I think that if we start with the smallest things, then we also have a shot at, like solving these bigger projects. So I myself, like my commitment is that every year I'm going to try a couple of students from my own country, specifically from my own home city, and get into good colleges. So whenever they message me, like with sort of college application help, I try doing that. But that is obviously just like a very small part of what we can do and an example. And I think that just in general, these kind of, like projects where we would be helping each out, where we'll be helping each other, and where we'll be discussing what are the ways to, like increase community engagement, to increase the different forms of education that are out there. That is the first step. We just need to talk. We just need to connect to different people, because way too often these initiatives are the initiatives of a very small circle of people. And now with living in this world of interconnectivity, I think that everything is possible. So I'm very much looking forward to idea you done specifically, but also just in general, people out there doing fantastic projects for debating, because I think that we need more things like Debate Mate in the UK, like the English speaking union programs, and there is definitely no clash between what they are doing and what other people are doing. So we should definitely do more of that.
Wonderful. I want to echo the idea of reaching out. And if people do want to reach out to you, how can they reach you?
The easiest one is Facebook or LinkedIn. So people can just basically Google my name. Other than that, you can also reach me at my email, which is p dot my surname at tasacademy.pl. That's it.
Okay. We'll reach out to that link and put it down in the description, as well as the link to the fantastic academy that you work with, and set up even. Thank you very much for coming on the show.